There are moments in your life when even the air feels heavier. You wake up in the morning and something inside you feels missing. The prayers you used to feel so deeply now sound hollow, like whispers lost in the wind. You try to worship, you try to speak to God, but the connection feels faint, like the line has gone dead. You wonder what changed. Did you do something wrong? Did heaven close its doors on you? Or has the silence itself become your teacher? If you're in that place right now, let me tell you something. You are not alone. You are not broken. You are being prepared for something holy. The silence you've been living in isn't punishment. It's transition. It's the space between your old identity and the new version of you that heaven has been quietly forming. Every chosen one walks through this silence, that sacred gap where nothing seems to move but everything inside you is shifting. You feel it, don't you? The strange weight pressing on your spirit, the ache of waiting without answers, the loneliness that no amount of company can fix. It's not just emotional exhaustion, it's divine reconfiguration. You've probably noticed that the people you thought would always be there aren't. The connections that once made sense now feel distant or empty. The conversations that used to fill you now drain you. And even though you try to hold on, you can feel heaven pulling you back into yourself, back into stillness. It's as if you've been placed in a spiritual quarantine. Everything familiar fades, and you're left wondering, why does it feel like heaven went silent? Let me paint this picture for you. Imagine heaven as a grand orchestra. For a long time, you were part of a melody. Life had rhythm, movement, sound. Then suddenly, the music stopped. All the instruments went quiet. You stand there, heart pounding, waiting for the next note, but it doesn't come. You think the song is over, but what you don't see is that the conductor has paused, not because the music is done, but because the next section requires perfect timing. That's what's happening to you. Heaven's silence is not the end of your song. It's the breath before the crescendo. There's something sacred about silence. It forces you to listen differently. In the noise, you hear everything but yourself. In the silence, you finally hear your truth. Many of the chosen ones have reached this moment, this divine stillness where God seems absent but is actually closer than ever. You're not being ignored. You're being recalibrated. Heaven is teaching you to feel faith instead of see it. It's like when a sculptor stops hammering and steps back. The silence is where they study the form, deciding the next strike. That's what God is doing with you right now, but I know it hurts. The silence is brutal when you don't understand it. It feels like losing direction, like your prayers are evaporating into space. Some nights, you lie awake, replaying everything. The things you said, the people you lost, the moments you thought were leading somewhere only to end abruptly. You try to be strong, but there's a kind of fatigue that comes from holding faith in the dark. And that's exactly what makes you different. You keep holding it anyway. You keep standing. Even when heaven is quiet, your spirit refuses to let go. Every chosen one reaches a point where heaven withdraws its comfort to reveal its strength. That's where you are. This is the stretch of the journey where faith stops being a feeling and becomes a knowing. You see, when heaven goes silent, that's when your spirit starts to speak. The world may look still, but inside you, everything is moving. Old wounds rise up for healing. Old fears demand closure. Old versions of you crumble so that the real one can emerge. And yes, it's uncomfortable. Transformation always is. You may not see it now, but there's meaning in this stillness. The silence is where heaven hides its most powerful messages. It's where clarity is born, not in the rush of noise, but in the patience of waiting. You are being purified through stillness. This is the divine reset before the revelation. Heaven went silent because it's preparing a sound so powerful, so unmistakable, that when it breaks, it will echo across every part of your life. Think of Joseph, betrayed, forgotten, thrown into darkness. For years, heaven was silent, but in that silence, Joseph wasn't being abandoned. He was being positioned. The same pit that held him in silence was the pathway to the palace that awaited him. And maybe, just maybe, your pit is not the end of your story either. Maybe it's the preparation ground for the recognition heaven is orchestrating for you. The silence has a purpose. It's where heaven separates noise from truth, pride from purity, impulse from intention. You've probably noticed that in this season, things that used to excite you now feel meaningless. That's not depression, that's divine maturity. You're shedding your old appetites so that new ones can form. Heaven is conditioning your spirit for higher assignments. You can't hear the next command if you're still tuned to the old noise, and that's what makes the silence sacred. It's not absence, it's alignment. The stillness is where your soul is learning how to live without constant reassurance. Heaven is teaching you how to walk by faith, not sight, by knowing, not noise. It's painful, yes, but necessary. Because when you come out of the silence, you won't need validation to know you're chosen. You won't need applause to know you're anointed. You'll just know, but let me tell you something else. While you think nothing is happening, something enormous is unfolding behind the veil. The silence you feel on earth is not mirrored in heaven. Up there, there's movement. Angels are shifting positions. Assignments are being rewritten. Paths are being cleared. And the name that heaven is whispering is yours. There's a moment, and it always comes, when the silence begins to break. You don't hear it first, you feel it. The energy around you changes. The air feels lighter. People who once ignored you begin to notice something different. Opportunities you thought were gone forever start circling back. It's subtle at first, almost unrecognizable, but it's real. The same heaven that went silent is now awakening on your behalf. But before that sound comes, before the celebration begins, there's always that one still moment, that last pause where you think you can't take another day of waiting. That's usually when heaven takes its deepest breath. It's the moment just before your breakthrough, the stillness before the wind shifts. That's where you are now, SO, if you've been crying in silence, questioning your worth, wondering if heaven still remembers your name. Hear me clearly. It does. Heaven has been watching. Every tear you've cried was recorded. Every act of faithfulness was witnessed. And soon, the silence that once broke you will become the sound that crowns you. You see, heaven doesn't forget the ones who endure the quiet. It rewards them. The silence is the test of the true, the furnace of faith. And when you pass through it, something extraordinary happens. The same heaven that once withheld its sound begins to release it, not as a whisper this time, but as a thunderous recognition. Heaven went silent for a moment, but it was only to prepare the symphony that's about to carry your name. There comes a moment, right after the silence has stretched so long it starts to feel endless, when something begins to stir beneath the surface of your life. You can't always explain it, but your spirit senses it, a gentle movement, like the first ripple before a tide. You start feeling moments of peace you can't trace to anything external. You catch yourself breathing differently. You begin to notice small things, a sudden calm in the chaos, a warmth when you pray, a sense of invisible presence when you thought you were utterly alone. That's the sign, chosen one, the silence is shifting. Heaven is turning its attention toward you again. You've been patient through the stillness, through the unanswered prayers, through the confusion of not knowing whether you're being prepared or punished. But what you couldn't see was that while you were waiting, something holy was building behind the veil. The silence you endured wasn't lifeless. It was filled with motion. Angels were being positioned, opportunities were being rearranged, and the destiny you thought had gone missing was quietly finding its way back to you. Heaven's silence was never about absence. It was about timing. Think of a sunrise. It doesn't appear all at once. The darkness softens first. The birds begin to stir. The world slowly shifts in color before the first ray touches the horizon. That's how divine timing works. Heaven allows silence to linger until the heart of the chosen one is strong enough to carry what's coming. You weren't being ignored. You were being equipped. You weren't being forgotten. You were being refined to fit a greater story. You may not have realized it, but heaven was studying your response to the silence. Every time you kept faith when it didn't make sense, every time you showed kindness when no one noticed, every time you refused to curse your circumstances, those moments echoed through eternity. Heaven watches more than actions. It listens to the tone of your heart. And yours has been steady through storms most people would have collapsed under. You didn't realize it, But every test you survived was a conversation between you and heaven, not through words, but through endurance. And here's the truth: endurance speaks louder than prayer. Anyone can praise when the blessings flow, but the chosen ones are recognized not by their victory songs. They're recognized by their silence, by the way they keep believing when the music stops. That's what moves heaven. That's what draws divine eyes toward you. Because heaven is not impressed by noise, it's moved by authenticity. And in your silence, you showed heaven your truth. There were days when your faith was hanging by a thread, when the weight of disappointment made your chest feel heavy, when you were tired of being strong, tired of being misunderstood, tired of saying, "I'm fine," when you were breaking inside. I know that place. It's the point where your soul feels like it's bleeding quietly. But let me tell you what was happening in that unseen realm. Heaven was holding its breath. Every angel that had been assigned to you was watching your response. The heavens went still, not because they abandoned you, but because your reaction in that moment was sacred. Heaven pauses to honor courage, and the kind of courage you showed in silence. That is rare. There's a spiritual principle that few talk about. Sometimes heaven goes quiet because it's listening. It's listening to your thoughts, your choices, your patience. You see, silence is heaven's way of saying, "Show me who you are when no one's watching." That's exactly what this season was. And you showed something extraordinary. You showed restraint when provoked. You showed faith when it made no sense. You showed compassion when you had every right to turn cold. Those are the moments that rewrite your destiny. Those are the choices that make angels rise. And while you were surviving what you thought was ordinary pain, heaven was writing your name into a new chapter. There are realms we can't see, dimensions of purpose we don't yet understand, and yet every action of integrity, every act of surrender, was being recorded. The same heaven that once seemed silent began to whisper your name in its courts. There's a sacred council, not symbolic, but real, where divine purpose is discussed, where timing is decided, where the next season of a soul's journey is announced. And it was there, in that eternal room of decision, that your name began to echo. Imagine it for a moment, that after all the silence, after all the nights you thought no one saw you, heaven calls your name. The sound travels across dimensions. Angels stop what they're doing. Light gathers. The silence breaks, not with thunder, but with reverence. Because what you carried quietly on earth was louder than most people's victories. The way you trusted when it didn't make sense, that's what drew heaven's attention, and that's where things begin to change. You see, the applause of heaven doesn't sound like human applause. It manifests as movement, sudden alignment, open doors, peace that feels supernatural. You'll start to notice people being drawn to you for no logical reason. The ones who left without closure may return, not to stay, but to recognize what they couldn't see before. The opportunities you thought were lost will begin to resurface in new forms. It won't make sense, but it will feel right. That's how you'll know. The silence has officially ended, but before the full sound of heaven's celebration reaches you, there's always a test of humility. Because the moment heaven starts praising your name, the temptation to prove yourself to people returns. Don't. You've already been proven where it mattered most. You don't need to broadcast what heaven has already affirmed. The ones who couldn't see your worth during your silence will see it in your stillness. Let heaven do the announcing. Your only task now is to stay aligned. When heaven begins to speak again, it does so subtly. You might not hear a voice. You'll sense a direction, a nudge to move, a peace that says, "This is the moment." And as you take small steps, you'll notice synchronicities, people crossing your path at the right time, doors opening where there were walls, inner guidance pulling you toward your calling. That's not coincidence. That's heaven responding to the silence you survived. This is the turning point, chosen one. The season where what was invisible becomes visible, where the waiting transforms into walking, where the stillness you feared becomes the foundation of your strength. You may still feel uncertain. That's natural. Transformation doesn't erase vulnerability. It gives it purpose. The key is not to rush the moment. Let the sound of heaven unfold slowly. It's not a single event. It's a symphony. Every note that's been missing from your life, will begin to return, one by one, and together, they'll create harmony that only silence could have prepared you to hear. You're about to realize that heaven's silence was not the absence of God's voice, but the tuning of your own. You've been trained to listen beyond noise, to feel alignment instead of chasing answers. That's why when others panic, you'll remain peaceful. When others rush, you'll move with quiet confidence. The silence built something in you, discernment. And that discernment is your new compass. You've passed the test of unseen faith. Now heaven moves into recognition. This is where every angel who once waited in silence begins to rise. They don't rise for wealth or fame. They rise for character. They rise for endurance. They rise because a human soul chose faith over fear, patience over pride, stillness over striving. And that's what you did. Heaven went silent for a moment, chosen one, but it was only to let your soul speak. And what it said moved all of heaven into motion. The angels are no longer watching in silence. They are standing. They are praising. They are preparing to walk with you into the next chapter. This is not the end of the silence. This is the birth of sound. You are entering the moment when everything that was hidden in stillness begins to reveal itself in motion. The same heaven that paused to listen to your faith is now ready to announce your name. But before the sound fully erupts, there's one last thing you must understand. The silence changed you for a reason. It didn't just prepare your circumstances. It transformed your spirit. You cannot step into the next season with the same patterns that survived the last one. The silence stripped away the noise so that when heaven starts speaking again, you'll actually recognize the voice. And that's where we go next, into the revelation of why heaven paused and what it truly means when every angel starts praising your name. There's a moment, quiet but cosmic, when heaven's stillness transforms into motion. You may not see it with your eyes, but your spirit knows it. The shift feels like light brushing against your heart after a long night of shadow. Something deep inside you begins to whisper, "It's time." You don't know what changed. The circumstances still look the same. The silence still lingers, but something in the atmosphere has shifted. The waiting has weight, but the weight now carries meaning. It's no longer crushing you. It's grounding you. That's when you know heaven has started to move. Heaven's movement doesn't begin with noise. It begins with recognition. When your name is spoken in divine chambers, creation itself listens. The same silence that once surrounded you begins to tremble with anticipation. Every angel who once stood still begins to turn their gaze toward the earth. And though you may feel nothing but exhaustion, heaven feels awe. You have become the living evidence of endurance. You have become the melody that silence was composing all along. You might imagine this scene, a vast celestial hall filled with light that hums like music. For a long time, the room was still. Then suddenly, a voice speaks your name. The sound carries power. It doesn't sound like syllables. It sounds like destiny. In that moment, heaven's silence breaks. Angels begin to stand, not because of your perfection, but because of your perseverance. You survived what was meant to silence you. You stood when the world expected you to collapse. You believed when faith seemed foolish. And in heaven, endurance is worship. There's a kind of praise that doesn't come from singing. It comes from surviving. And heaven celebrates that. Every tear you cried, every quiet prayer whispered into the void, every time you forgave without apology, those moments became music. The angels weren't silent because they ignored you. They were silent because they were listening. They were studying the symphony of your endurance. And when you finally reached the point of surrender, when you said, "Even if I never hear another answer, I will still trust," heaven erupted. The sound of your name in heaven doesn't announce reward. It announces readiness. It tells creation that you've completed one cycle and are ready for the next. It signals that what once was testing will now become testimony. The silence wasn't proof of absence. It was proof of preparation. Every angel knows that before divine unveiling, there must be divine quiet. Heaven doesn't rush. It waits until your heart beats in rhythm with purpose. And now your rhythm has aligned, but this isn't about recognition in the worldly sense. The applause of heaven is not fame or validation, it's transformation. It's the subtle shift in your atmosphere when things begin to flow without force. It's the sudden peace that replaces anxiety. It's walking through doors you didn't even knock on. It's being led, not by opportunity, but by alignment. You begin to realize that things that once required struggle now arrive naturally, not because life got easier, but because your energy matches heaven's timing. There's a secret here that only those who've endured divine silence understand. When you stop striving to be seen, heaven begins to showcase you. Because true recognition is never achieved, it's revealed. The moment you stop begging the world to notice you is the moment heaven begins to whisper your name to the right people in the right rooms at the right time. And this is what's happening for you now. The silence prepared your spirit for quiet recognition, the kind that doesn't need validation to feel complete. You see, heaven never celebrates noise. It celebrates alignment. When your actions, your faith, and your purpose align, heaven responds. And that's what the angels are standing for. Not your success, but your surrender. They rise because your spirit finally mirrors the rhythm of divine truth. You've become who you were meant to be, not through performance, but through patience. And patience, in heaven's language, is power. This is where the shift becomes visible. Suddenly, things that once rejected you begin to call for you. Places that once felt closed start to open. The people who overlooked you start to sense your presence again, but this time, it's different. You're not reaching for approval anymore, you're radiating authenticity. The silence stripped you of the need to prove. You've learned to let peace speak louder than explanation. You've learned that you don't have to chase what's aligned with you. It will find you naturally, effortlessly, because heaven has already announced your name. And maybe that's why this moment feels surreal, because after being hidden for so long, being seen feels strange. After being silent for so long, hearing movement feels too good to be true. But it's real. You've entered the shift where heaven's applause begins to manifest on earth. You might not hear angels clapping, but you'll feel it in opportunities, in timing, in synchronicities too precise to dismiss. You'll look back and realize that every delay was choreography. Every closed door was divine timing keeping you in rhythm. The same heaven that went silent for a season is now the same heaven singing your name. But remember, the song isn't about ego, it's about elevation. Heaven celebrates not because you finally made it, but because you finally understood that you never needed to. You were already chosen, already equipped, already loved. What changed wasn't heaven's view of you, it was your view of yourself. And that realization is what caused every angel to stand. There's something incredibly humbling about divine recognition. It doesn't come with loud applause. It comes with deep peace. You start realizing that you don't want to prove anything anymore. You just want to live in truth. The silence has detoxed you from external validation. You've learned the language of the unseen, and that's a language few understand. You now speak in faith, in energy, in discernment. You know when something's meant for you without needing proof. That's the power of surviving silence. It's not about being loud. It's about being aligned. You've become someone the world can't define because your validation no longer comes from it. That's why heaven's recognition feels so different. It's not noisy. It's sacred. You might find yourself smiling for no reason, feeling at peace in moments that once terrified you. That's what happens when heaven's frequency finally syncs with your spirit. You've become a vessel of balance, a living example of divine patience turned into power. But understand this, when heaven praises your name, it's not just for celebration, it's for assignment. The recognition is the signal that it's time to move, time to build, time to step into what silence prepared you for. Every moment of isolation was training for this clarity. You are being released into a new season where your words will carry weight, where your presence will bring peace, where your spirit will be a light for those still lost in their own silence. You're not just rising, you're being commissioned, and as you walk forward, you'll start noticing divine confirmations, not coincidences, but spiritual affirmations that say, "You're in rhythm now." A conversation you didn't plan, a message that arrives right when you need it, a door that opens without you asking. That's how heaven claps, not through noise, but through alignment. Every time something fits perfectly without effort, that's heaven saying, "We see you. Keep going." Do you remember how lonely the silence felt? How endless the waiting seemed. That was the soil. This recognition, this flow, this peace is the harvest. The angels aren't celebrating because your suffering ended. They're celebrating because it produced fruit. You became someone unshakable. Someone whose faith is not dependent on outcomes. Someone who understands that silence was never absence. It was sacred construction. And now, when heaven praises your name, it's not because of what you've gained, but because of who you've become. You are walking proof that silence does not destroy the chosen. It refines them. You are evidence that patience is not weakness, that isolation is not rejection, and that waiting is not wasted. You are the sound that heaven's silence was building. S.O. when you feel the shift, when things start moving, when peace starts returning, when purpose begins to stir again, don't rush it. Walk slowly. Let the sound of heaven settle into your life. Let gratitude replace anxiety. Let peace lead your decisions. The applause of heaven is not a signal to run ahead. It's an invitation to walk in rhythm with grace, because this, chosen one, is just the beginning. The angels have stood. The song has begun. And soon, you'll see the reflection of that heavenly celebration unfold right here on earth, through breakthroughs, divine timing, and the gentle revelation of why the silence had to happen first. There comes a sacred stillness before restoration, a quiet that almost feels like disbelief. You look around your life and realize the chaos has stopped, but peace hasn't fully settled yet. It's that strange middle ground between storm and sunrise, where you're not fighting anymore, but you're not celebrating yet either. This is the in-between, the space where heaven's recognition begins to take form on earth. You don't see angels, but you start to feel movement. Subtle shifts, small, divine alignments that whisper, the season has changed. It begins quietly. One morning you wake up and the heaviness you've carried for years doesn't feel as heavy. A memory that used to ache now feels neutral, like the pain lost its voice. People who once misunderstood, you suddenly start to see the truth. Opportunities that were silent begin to stir. It's not loud, but it's real. You're standing in the soft unveiling of divine reversal, when heaven begins to turn everything the enemy meant for harm into quiet restoration. You may not have noticed it yet, but your silent season changed your spiritual authority. You used to speak from wounds, now you speak from wisdom. You used to fight for clarity, now you carry it. You used to beg for peace, now peace follows you. That's why people will start coming to you, not because you sought attention, but because your energy became a refuge. You'll see it in the way strangers open up to you, how your words suddenly carry more weight, how your presence itself becomes medicine. This is what heaven does when it praises your name. It amplifies your impact without you having to raise your voice. Restoration doesn't always appear as compensation. Sometimes it comes as completion, a quiet closing of cycles that once drained you. It's when you finally stop rehearsing the pain. It's when your spirit feels ready to release what used to define you. Heaven's reversal is not just external, it's internal. You start to feel whole where you were once fractured. The apology that never came no longer matters. The validation you once chased feels irrelevant. You're not trying to fix the past anymore, you're finally at peace with it. And that peace becomes your promotion. There's something divine about the moment you stop trying to prove your worth. That's when heaven begins to show the world who you really are. Because your silence season wasn't wasted, it was your unveiling in disguise. While you were hidden, God was establishing you. While people thought you were being overlooked, you were being fortified. And now that the timing is right, heaven is pulling the curtains back. Not for your ego, but for your purpose. Every delay was a stage being prepared for your authentic arrival, and you'll notice how restoration doesn't come with chaos, it comes with clarity. The people meant to return will come back with peace, not confusion. The doors meant for you will open without resistance. The opportunities that align with your calling will not require you to compromise your peace to keep them. That's the sign of heaven's movement. It flows, it doesn't force. Everything that begins to align now will carry the same stillness that once defined your silence. Because that stillness is the language of heaven. But before the full restoration arrives, you'll experience a divine test. not of struggle, but of stillness. Heaven will want to see if you've truly learned the rhythm of peace. When new doors open, will you move with grace or with fear of missing out? When old connections reappear, will you engage from love or from the need to be understood? When recognition comes, will you seek validation again or remain grounded in your quiet strength? This is the final refinement, learning to walk in blessings without losing the humility that silence taught you, because restoration without wisdom leads to repetition. But restoration with discernment leads to destiny. That's why heaven's timing took so long. It wasn't delaying your blessings, it was deepening your understanding. Now you no longer see from the surface, you see from the soul. You don't just want things to happen, you want them to mean something. And that shift in intention is what makes you unstoppable. You've matured into someone who doesn't chase outcomes, you create atmospheres. And heaven recognizes that as true leadership. This is why the angels stood. Not because your pain ended, but because your purpose began. You've entered a new dimension where your influence is no longer based on effort, but on essence. Your energy now carries the fragrance of heaven, calm, pure, unshakable. And that's what draws restoration to you. People will start coming back, not because you demanded it, but because they'll feel drawn to your peace. Opportunities will open, not because you fought for them, but because heaven assigned them. Everything that left during your silence was never lost. It was repositioned. Heaven's reversal works like this. First, it removes what distracts, then it restores what defines. The subtraction was protection. The restoration is precision. Everything that returns now fits perfectly into your purpose. You'll notice this alignment when you begin to walk into rooms where your presence feels predestined. Conversations will happen that confirm what your spirit already knew. You'll start hearing phrases like, "I don't know why, but I feel led to help you," or "You've been on my mind lately." That's heaven moving people into place to honor what you've carried quietly for so long. And it won't just be people. Creation itself will begin to respond to your alignment. You'll find unexpected favor in small things. You'll speak life into situations and watch them shift. You'll see divine timing so precise it makes you weep. That's heaven's language, restoration wrapped in subtlety. The angels are not shouting your name because you're perfect. They're rejoicing because you became pure in intention. You now move not from ego, but from empathy. Not from ambition, but from assignment. The more you lean into this stillness, the more miracles will unfold naturally. You'll start realizing that everything you once prayed for now happens through you, not just to you. You've become the answered prayer. You are the vessel through which heaven operates. That's why your energy feels different to people. It's no longer human striving, it's divine flow. Heaven's praise was never about noise, it was about activation. And you, chosen one, have now been activated, but I want you to pause here. Breathe in this truth. Heaven never forgot you. The silence wasn't absence, it was alignment. Every unseen moment mattered. Every tear watered the soil of your purpose. And now, as things begin to reverse, don't rush to rebuild what God dismantled. Some things were not meant to return. Not every apology deserves a reunion. Some closures are meant to stay closed so your restoration can remain pure. The test of this new season will be your restraint, knowing when to stay silent even after heaven starts speaking your name. Because wisdom isn't about always having something to say. It's about knowing when to let your peace speak for you. That's the power of someone who has survived divine silence. You no longer react, you discern. You no longer chase, you attract. You no longer seek approval, you move in purpose. And that shift is exactly what heaven is celebrating. I end this phase of restoration. Your role is simple. Stay aligned. Move only when led, speak only when necessary, love without attachment, and trust without control. The angels aren't clapping for noise, they're clapping for obedience. They're rejoicing because you've become someone who doesn't need to understand everything to stay faithful. You've become a vessel that heaven can now trust with greater responsibility, because soon, this restoration will no longer be just about you. Heaven's recognition isn't meant to isolate you in glory. It's meant to position you for service. The silence that once purified you was not preparation for a throne, but for a mission. And as your name continues to echo through heaven's halls, you'll begin to see how your story, your pain, your patience, your perseverance becomes a lantern for others still lost in their own waiting. That's the beauty of divine reversal. Heaven didn't just bring you through silence so you could be restored. It brought you through so you could restore others. You're not returning to the world as the same person. You're returning as evidence. Evidence that silence can sanctify. Evidence that waiting can work wonders. Evidence that heaven still moves, even when it feels stilled. So walk softly into this restoration. Don't let excitement pull you into noise. Let gratitude guide you instead. You've seen too much to go back to your old patterns. You've felt too deeply to pretend you're the same. You are not in a comeback. You're in a becoming. The angels are not praising your return. They're praising your rebirth. You survived silence. You learned to listen. You learned to trust what you couldn't see. And now, every step you take from here will echo through heaven like a song of completion. The reversal has begun, and with it comes divine peace, the kind that cannot be taken, cannot be shaken, and cannot be explained. When heaven begins to move through you instead of around you, everything changes. The air feels different. Your steps carry purpose now, not the heavy kind that feels like pressure, but the sacred kind that feels like presence. You start to realize that restoration was never just about getting things back. It was about becoming someone new. This is the phase most chosen ones never talk about, the quiet transformation after the storm, when you begin to live from your healed identity instead of your hurt history. It's not loud. It's not public. It's an invisible glow, a calm that follows chaos. And that calm becomes your new power. This transformation begins subtly. The same places that once triggered you no longer hold power. The same conversations that once made you shrink now make you stand tall. You walk into rooms differently, not because you have something to prove, but because you finally know who you are. The silence season stripped away every false label, every external definition, every illusion of control. What's left now is raw truth, the real you, the one heaven always saw, finally visible on earth. You see, heaven doesn't restore things to how they were. It transforms them into what they were meant to be. And that's what's happening inside you. You're not just coming back stronger, you're coming back stiller. You no longer react from insecurity, you respond from insight. You no longer strive to be chosen. You realize you always were. That awareness changes everything. Because when you know who you are, you stop chasing what's beneath your calling. You stop confusing attention for alignment. You stop wasting energy trying to fit into spaces that were too small for your purpose. You've reached the point where your peace becomes power. It's not passive, it's protective.
People will notice it before you speak.
They'll sense that you've been through something deep, something that broke you open but didn't break you down. And they'll lean in, wondering what changed. That's how your transformation begins to influence others, not by preaching, but by embodying. You've become living proof that silence doesn't destroy the chosen, it refines them. This is the divine irony. The same silence that once isolated you now becomes the language of your influence. You'll find yourself sitting with people who are still in their silent season, those who feel abandoned, confused, or unseen, and you'll know exactly what to say. You'll speak with the same calm tone that once comforted you in your darkest nights. You'll tell them that heaven isn't ignoring them, it's investing in them. That their loneliness isn't punishment, it's preparation. And as you speak, they'll see something in your eyes, not theory, but testimony. You've lived what you're saying. That's when you realize your calling isn't to be impressive, it's to be impactful. The chosen ones were never meant to blend in, they were meant to illuminate. And illumination doesn't mean being the brightest, it means being steady. You've become a steady light now, not the kind that flickers with emotion, but the kind that guides ships through storms. That's why heaven had to silence you, to teach you how to burn without burning out. Transformation also changes your relationship with waiting. You no longer fear delays, you understand them. You no longer rush divine timing, you flow with it. When something doesn't move right away, you don't panic, you discern. You've learned that what's meant for you will never require you to abandon your peace to keep it. You no longer chase outcomes. You cultivate readiness. Because now you understand, manifestation isn't about force, it's about frequency. When you stay in alignment, heaven brings what's yours right on time. There's something sacred about this maturity. It's quiet, but it radiates authority. You can walk into a situation and shift the energy without saying a word. You can sense when something's right, when someone's not genuine, when a door is divine or deceptive. That's the gift silence gave you, discernment. Heaven trusted you with clarity because you learned to hear beyond words. And that's what separates you now. You don't operate from emotion anymore. You move from discernment. You see the unseen, not because you're trying to, but because your spirit is trained to. This discernment is part of your transformation. It's heaven's signature within you. It's what makes you effective in your new assignment. Because transformation isn't just for healing, it's for mission. You've been entrusted with divine awareness. You'll begin to feel when people need comfort before they even speak. You'll notice patterns others overlook. You'll pick up on spiritual energy shifts around you, not to be overwhelmed by them, but to intercede, to stabilize, to bring peace. That's what chosen ones do. They anchor heaven in chaotic spaces. And make no mistake, this transformation will not go unnoticed. Some will be drawn to it, others will resist it. The same people who once dismissed you will now see your growth and feel convicted. Some will reach out, others will stay silent out of pride. But don't hold grudges. The silence trained you for grace. When people come back, you'll know who's meant to reconnect and who's meant to stay in your past. Forgive freely, but reconnect wisely. You can love people without returning to the same level of access. That's what healed wisdom looks like. You'll also start noticing that your prayers sound different. You don't pray from desperation anymore. You pray from partnership. You no longer beg God to fix things. You ask for guidance on how to co-create solutions. You no longer cry for miracles. You live as one. This is the mark of a transformed chosen one. You understand that heaven doesn't just intervene from above. It flows through you on earth. You've become the vessel through which divine change happens, and this is where your influence expands. Heaven will start placing you in environments where your peace is needed. Workplaces, families, communities, even random encounters. None of it is accidental. You'll find yourself being the voice of calm in chaos, the reminder of faith in fear, the light in someone's confusion. This isn't about popularity, it's about purpose. You're not being elevated to be admired, you're being elevated to serve. The higher heaven lifts you, the more people you'll help heal, not through words alone, but through energy, integrity, and presence. This transformation also changes how you see success. You used to measure it in visibility, now you measure it in peace. You used to equate blessings with things, now you see blessings as alignment. You've outgrown the need to prove. You've entered the season where less means more, fewer distractions, fewer attachments, but deeper meaning in everything. And because of that, your abundance will look different too. It won't come from striving. It will come from flowing. Things will begin to multiply not because you're working harder, but because you're walking in divine frequency. Every chosen one reaches this realization eventually, that the real reward was never what you were waiting for. It was who you became while waiting. That's why heaven celebrates you. The applause you felt wasn't for survival alone. It was for transformation. You've become a vessel of balance in an unbalanced world. And that's rare. That's sacred. That's divine. But don't rush this phase. Transformation unfolds in layers. You'll feel new aspects of yourself emerging daily. More patience, more empathy, more clarity. Sometimes it'll feel disorienting, like you're shedding identities faster than you can define new ones. But that's normal. The old version of you is dissolving, and the new one is still being revealed. Be gentle with yourself in this unfolding. You're not lost, you're expanding. You're not behind. You're blooming at the exact pace heaven planned. As you embrace this transformation, remember this truth. The same silence that once terrified you is now your superpower. You know how to be still when others panic. You know how to hear heaven in the noise. You know how to find meaning in delay. You've mastered what most never learn: trust in the unseen. And that trust will carry you into your next level of purpose, because the transformation isn't the end, it's the bridge. You're now stepping into a phase where your internal growth will start producing external fruit. Heaven will begin aligning divine connections, creative ideas, opportunities, and platforms that match the person you've become. The impact will be undeniable, not because you're trying to make a name, but because heaven already announced your name. S.O. Don't fear visibility. You're ready now. You've been refined enough to handle recognition without losing humility. You've been purified enough to carry influence without contamination. You've been tested enough to lead without ego. And that's why heaven can now trust you with expansion. The angels stood because they saw this version of you, the one walking in quiet strength, balanced between grace and power, ready to fulfill divine purpose without forgetting divine peace. This is your transformation season, chosen one. Heaven's applause was not an ending, it was a commissioning. You are stepping into divine influence now. The world is about to witness the light that silence built. Not loud, not boastful, but steady, radiant, unbreakable. There's a sacred turning point in every chosen one's journey, the moment your inner transformation begins shaping your outer reality. You start to see the evidence of heaven's hand in everything you touch. It's not dramatic or loud. It's quiet and deliberate. The same stillness that once felt like isolation now becomes the force that guides your every step. You've entered what I call the orchestration phase, when your transformed energy starts rearranging your world in alignment with divine purpose. Everything that happens now carries intention. Every person you meet, every conversation, every delay, every open door, it's all part of heaven's synchronization. At first, it feels almost strange. The same world that once resisted you now starts to respond to you. The frequency you carry has changed, and creation recognizes it. Things that used to feel heavy begin to move lightly. Tasks that once drained you now flow naturally. It's not that life got easier, it's that you've become more aligned. Heaven doesn't remove difficulty, it refines perception. You're no longer fighting against divine flow, you've become part of it. And when you're in flow with heaven, even obstacles become orchestration. This is where you begin to realize that destiny isn't something you chase, it's something that unfolds through alignment. The world has been taught to chase outcomes, but chosen ones learn to attract alignment. Because when your internal world matches heaven's frequency, everything external begins to rearrange itself to serve your mission. Doors open that were once sealed. Conversations happen at divine timing. People enter your life with keys to the next level of your calling. These are not coincidences. They are divine confirmations that you are walking in purpose. And yet, this phase requires deep awareness. Because as heaven expands you, distractions also return, but this time, disguised as opportunities. You'll need discernment more than ever. You'll have to ask yourself often, does this bring peace or pressure? Does this align with my spirit or only with my ego? Every new opportunity isn't divine, and every divine opportunity won't look impressive. Some doors will glitter but lead back to chaos. Others will look small but open into destiny. The silent season trained your discernment so you could now navigate expansion without confusion. You'll notice how heaven starts connecting you to people who match your frequency, kindred spirits who carry similar light. They won't drain you, they'll multiply you. The connection won't be built on convenience, but on purpose. You'll feel it, an unspoken recognition, a divine familiarity, like your spirits have met before. These people are part of heaven's network, destiny alignments, not social connections. They'll help you carry the next phase of your mission. Because even though the silent season was meant to isolate you, the purpose season is meant to connect you. Heaven never meant for you to stay alone. It meant for you to meet your tribe. But this time, the connections are different. You no longer bond through pain. You bond through peace. You no longer attract from need. You attract from wholeness. You've become magnetic, not because you seek attention, but because your energy radiates truth. People will be drawn to that calm confidence. They'll sense that you've walked through fire and found gold in the ashes. They'll feel safe around you, inspired by you, transformed through you, not because of what you say, but because of who you've become. That's the true power of the chosen ones in their activation phase. They carry heaven wherever they go. I end this stage. Your purpose begins to speak louder than your pain ever did. You start realizing that your silence wasn't random. It was strategic. Heaven was shaping your voice so it could carry weight. That's why your words now touch hearts differently. When you speak, people listen, not because you're loud, but because your spirit carries authority. It's the kind of authority that can't be learned, only lived. Every tear, every lonely night, every unanswered prayer, they all gave your words depth. And now heaven is using that depth to reach others through you. But purpose doesn't always reveal itself in a single moment. It unfolds gradually, like sunrise breaking through fog. One day you'll notice how the things that once hurt you now help others. You'll start writing, teaching, mentoring, creating, or leading in ways that use your wounds as wisdom. You'll see that your pain wasn't wasted. It was recycled into power. And that's when everything begins to make sense. The silence that once broke you becomes the foundation of your voice. The isolation that once emptied you becomes the well from which others will drink. As your influence expands, humility becomes your safeguard. Heaven will keep reminding you you were not elevated for status, but for service. The angels didn't stand to make you proud. They stood to anoint your purpose. Your platform, your resources, your visibility, they're not trophies, they're tools. The more you bless others, the more heaven blesses you. That's the divine economy. What you pour out multiplies. You'll realize that your purpose isn't to be above anyone, but to lift those who are still where you once were. And in doing that, you'll notice something remarkable. The same heaven that once went silent now begins to speak through you. You'll hear divine whispers guiding you in real time. Not booming voices, but gentle nudges in your spirit. Go there. Wait here. Call them. Release this. You'll realize that divine communication was never absent. You just needed stillness to understand its language. The silent season was heaven teaching you how to hear in frequency, not volume. Now, every instinct aligned with peace is a message from above. The orchestration continues. You'll find yourself at the right place at the right time so often that it almost feels supernatural, because it is. Heaven's coordination is beyond logic. You'll meet someone who opens a door that changes your life. You'll walk through a delay that leads you to destiny. You'll take a detour that turns into divine redirection. Every event, no matter how ordinary, will begin to carry spiritual significance. This is what living in divine flow feels like. Everything working together for good, not because you're controlling it, but because you're surrendered to it. But even in this flow, there will be moments where heaven pauses again, not for punishment, but for recalibration. Just when everything feels like it's moving fast, heaven might slow you down. That's not regression, that's refinement. Heaven pauses momentum to protect meaning, because expansion without balance leads to burnout. So when things slow down, don't panic, breathe. Remember, heaven moves in rhythms, not rushes. Every delay now is divine pacing. You're not behind. You're being aligned. There's also a deeper reason for this new phase of orchestration. Impact. You're not being aligned just for personal fulfillment. You're being positioned for global purpose. The world is shifting spiritually, and heaven is raising voices that carry truth, peace, and light. You're one of those voices. You've been refined not for comfort, but for contribution. The silence wasn't wasted. It was setting the stage for this very moment. The same endurance that got you through the dark will now light the path for others. You'll notice how your influence begins to ripple. People you've never met will be touched by your story. Your presence will plant seeds in others' hearts. A single word, gesture, or act of compassion will carry divine impact. You won't always see the results, but heaven will. That's why the angels are still standing, because your life has become a message, and that message is echoing far beyond what you can see. And yet, through it all, humility will keep you anchored. You'll find yourself constantly whispering, "Thank you." Not because everything is perfect, but because everything now feels purposeful. Gratitude will become your heartbeat. You'll start to see miracles in mundane moments, a kind word at the right time, an unexpected provision, a peaceful night after years of restlessness. These aren't random. They're heaven's way of saying, we're still here. We never left. This is the paradox of divine orchestration. It feels effortless, but it's deeply intentional. You don't have to chase what's already yours. You don't have to beg heaven to bless what it already designed for you. All you have to do is stay aligned, stay grateful, stay grounded. The same stillness that once silenced you will now sustain you. Because the greatest strength of a chosen one isn't their ability to fight, it's their ability to flow. And so, as your world expands and your purpose unfolds, remember this. Everything you touch now carries the fingerprint of heaven. You are not just a survivor of silence. You are a conductor of divine harmony. Your steps are part of a celestial choreography that began long before you knew your name. Heaven didn't just praise you because you endured. Heaven praised you because you became a vessel through which divine alignment could move freely on earth. This is what it means to live in purpose, not to chase destiny, but to embody it. Not to force outcomes, but to flow in faith. Not to wait for miracles, but to become one. There comes a sacred moment in the journey of every chosen one when everything that was once broken suddenly begins to make sense, not through words, but through a deep inner knowing. It doesn't come as thunder or lightning, but as stillness. The same silence that once tormented you now speaks volumes. It's as if heaven is gently whispering, "This is why it all had to happen." You don't hear it through your ears. You feel it through your soul. This is the moment when the pain, the waiting, the losses, the confusion, all start aligning into divine symmetry. The darkness that once seemed endless now reveals itself as sacred preparation. What you thought was abandonment was orchestration. What felt like punishment was protection. What seemed like delay was divine design. You remember how heavy it all was, how every prayer felt unanswered. Every night stretched longer than the last, and every step forward seemed to bring new resistance. You carried that weight quietly, even when no one saw it. But now, looking back, you begin to realize that those seasons were not wasted. They built something within you that could not be formed in comfort. They forged spiritual strength that no easy path could ever create. Every tear watered the soil of your destiny. Every rejection redirected you toward divine placement. Every silence carved depth into your soul so heaven could fill it with purpose. And then it happens, that inner flash of revelation that changes everything. You see that heaven didn't go silent because it forgot you. It went silent because it was working through you. You weren't waiting for an answer. You were becoming one. The angels' silence wasn't absence. It was reverence. They were watching the transformation unfold in real time. Heaven wasn't testing your patience. It was unveiling your identity. You were not being punished, you were being positioned. And now, as the realization dawns, you feel the shift, the divine calm that comes when understanding finally replaces anxiety. The reason heaven went silent was because your life entered the sacred blueprint, a divine pattern that required stillness for manifestation. Heaven doesn't speak when it's building, it speaks when it's ready to reveal. Just as an artist doesn't narrate every brushstroke, heaven painted your destiny in silence. And now, the masterpiece is emerging, your life as testimony, your endurance as proof. Every angel that once stood still is now rejoicing, not because the pain is gone, but because the purpose is revealed. They celebrate not your comfort, but your completion, the becoming of who you were always meant to be. You realize this isn't about worldly recognition or material victory. It's about alignment. It's about becoming one with divine flow, where peace is no longer dependent on circumstances. You find yourself standing in the same world that once broke you, yet nothing feels the same. The sky looks clearer, the air feels lighter, the silence feels sacred. That's when you know the transformation is complete, when what used to hurt you now humbles you. When what used to confuse you now comforts you. You've crossed the threshold from asking why me to whispering thank you. Heaven never needed your perfection. It needed your surrender. The moment you stopped fighting the silence and started trusting it, something shifted. You became aligned with divine timing. That's when heaven started moving again, not with thunder, but with quiet authority. You noticed small signs first: the peace that didn't make sense, the inner strength that grew overnight, the clarity that replaced fear. These were heaven's confirmations that you had passed the test, that the silence had done its work. And then came the celebration. It wasn't loud or visible to the world. It was celestial. The angels didn't stand because you achieved something. They stood because you became something. You became light in human form. You became a living expression of resilience. You became proof that faith is stronger than silence, that endurance is stronger than confusion, that divine love can survive even the longest dark night. In that moment, heaven didn't just celebrate your survival, it celebrated your awakening, because now you carry something unbreakable. You've walked through storms and discovered that peace was never about the absence of trouble, but the presence of trust. You've faced betrayal and realized that love without expectation is the highest form of strength. You've lost people and learned that divine companionship never leaves. You've waited for answers and found that wisdom often speaks without words. You've been misunderstood, yet you stayed kind. You've been delayed, yet you didn't give up. And that's why every angel in heaven rose, because your faith didn't collapse under pressure. It grew roots. The realization deepens. Heaven's silence was never punishment. It was the sound of preparation.
Think about that.
The carpenter's workshop is noisy when something's being built, but heaven's construction happens in stillness. The quiet season was the sound of God aligning everything behind the veil. When you heard nothing, heaven was designing everything. When you felt abandoned, heaven was assigning angels to your future. When you thought nothing was moving, heaven was moving everything. The silence wasn't the absence of sound, it was the presence of strategy. And as this truth settles in your spirit, something inside you heals completely. You stop trying to make sense of what's gone. You stop resenting the weight. You stop mourning the version of you that didn't survive the silence. Because now you understand that version had to die for the real you to emerge. The silence didn't kill you. It resurrected you. It stripped you of illusion, ego, and fear, leaving only what was divine. The angels didn't applaud your pain. They applauded your rebirth. Now, you begin to live differently. You no longer chase signs. You are one. You no longer beg for guidance. You walk as guided. You no longer seek validation. You carry peace. You move through life with quiet power, not because you know every answer, but because you trust every step. And that's what makes you unstoppable, not your strength, but your surrender. The same silence that once made you doubt now fuels your wisdom. The same solitude that once broke your heart now amplifies your discernment. You've evolved from student to vessel, from seeker to source. People will notice the difference, even if they can't explain it. They'll say, something about you feels different. And it's true, something is different. You carry divine calm. You speak slower, but every word lands deeper. You no longer rush because you've seen what patience births. You no longer fear endings because you've lived through resurrection. That's the unshakable peace of a chosen one who's walked through divine silence and found heaven waiting on the other side. And if you listen closely, you can almost feel the atmosphere of heaven around you. The angels who once stood still are now moving again, guiding, protecting, celebrating. You can sense their presence in moments of unexpected joy, in quiet mornings when you wake up with no anxiety, in random encounters that feel divinely timed. These are heaven's ways of saying, you did it. You became what we saw in you all along. That's why heaven went silent for a moment, because you were in transformation. And when transformation is complete, celebration begins. Every angel praises not because of what you received, but because of what you became, living proof that divine silence is never abandonment, but activation. You've graduated from needing reassurance to embodying revelation. You no longer need to be told you're chosen. You live like it. You no longer look for miracles. You realize your life is one. Do you now understand why heaven had to pause? It needed to let the old energy fade, the old attachments dissolve, the old version of you fall away. It was sacred surgery, done in silence to prepare you for visibility. Because heaven never reveals what it hasn't first refined. And when refinement is done, revelation begins. That's what's happening now, your revelation season. Everything you touch carries grace. Everything you say carries power. Everything you endure turns into wisdom. And so, as you stand in this moment of divine clarity, remember this: silence was the sound of your wings growing. Stillness was the soil where your strength was planted. Waiting was the bridge between who you were and who you've become. You didn't lose anything. You became everything. Heaven didn't abandon you. It was aligning you. The angels didn't forget your name. They were preparing to sing it. And now that your transformation is complete, heaven has begun its praise. The silence broke not because you demanded answers, but because you became one. You became the living echo of divine endurance, the kind that shakes both heaven and earth. Every angel stands not because of your victory, but because of your faith. You've passed the test. You've become the message. There is a moment, quiet, almost invisible, when the storm finally ends. It doesn't announce itself with lightning or noise. It arrives softly, like dawn after the longest night. For the chosen ones, this is the moment of awakening, not the beginning of the journey, but the completion of it. After years of silence, after countless nights questioning heaven, after carrying invisible battles no one else could see, you wake up one morning and realize peace has returned. Not the temporary peace that depends on circumstances, but the kind that lives inside you, unshakable and eternal. It's the reward of surviving the silence with faith intact. It's the divine confirmation that everything you endured was not in vain. This is the stillness after revelation, the sacred quiet where you no longer feel the need to fight for understanding because you've become it. You start seeing your life from a higher view. Every disappointment, every closed door, every painful goodbye now fitting perfectly into the larger picture of divine timing. You no longer resent the waiting, you respect it. You no longer question the silence, you cherish it. Because now you understand. Heaven wasn't punishing you, it was teaching you to hear beyond noise, to trust beyond evidence, to love beyond reason. You walk through your days differently now. The same streets, the same faces, the same routines, yet everything feels changed. There's light where there used to be heaviness. There's clarity where confusion once lived. There's peace where pain used to echo. You've stopped running. You've stopped striving. You've surrendered fully, and in that surrender, you've found strength that doesn't need to prove itself. That's the power of divine awakening. It doesn't make you louder. It makes you lighter. To end this phase, heaven no longer feels distant. It feels woven into everything. You sense divine presence in ordinary moments, in sunlight through the window, in the sound of laughter, in quiet evenings where your soul finally feels at rest. You realize heaven never truly went silent. You just had to learn its language. And now that you can hear it, you recognize that heaven speaks through peace. Every time you feel that deep calm within, that's heaven saying, you're exactly where you need to be. You've reached what spiritual teachers call the embodiment stage. It's no longer about knowing who you are, it's about living it. You no longer need to declare your strength, you radiate it. You no longer need to defend your calling. You walk in it effortlessly. The very energy that once felt chaotic now flows through you as harmony. The same silence that once terrified you has become your home. You've evolved from a seeker of light to a carrier of it. This stage doesn't mean life becomes perfect. Challenges still appear, but they no longer destabilize you. You no longer see them as punishment, but as opportunities to demonstrate mastery. When storms come now, you don't panic, you pause. You've learned that peace is not the absence of storms, but the ability to remain centered within them. You know that even when heaven seems quiet, it's still speaking through alignment, timing, and intuition. You've grown beyond emotional reaction into spiritual response. That's the mark of someone who is truly awakened. And now, heaven begins to trust you with more, not because you prayed louder, but because you've proven ready. The silence prepared you for stewardship. It trained your spirit to handle blessings without arrogance and delays without despair. You're no longer the version of you that needed constant signs to believe. Now, belief is your natural state. You don't need to see to trust. You trust because you've seen too much of heaven's consistency to doubt again. This is the true reward of the silence, unshakable faith. The kind that doesn't waver when results don't show. The kind that doesn't collapse under pressure. The kind that says, even if heaven says nothing, I know I am loved, guided, and seen. That kind of faith is what turns ordinary humans into divine instruments. That's why the angels stand. Not because of your accomplishments, but because of your transformation. Because you learned what most never do, that God's silence is not absence, it's intimacy. It's the quiet space where purpose takes form. I end this awakened state. Your life becomes ministry without you even trying. Your energy comforts others without words. People who are still in their silent seasons will find peace just by being near you. They'll ask, how did you survive it? And you'll smile softly and say, because I stopped trying to escape what was meant to shape me. You'll guide them not by preaching, but by presence. You'll show them that surrender isn't giving up, it's giving over. It's saying, I trust what I cannot see, because what I've seen is enough. You've become what heaven intended all along, a living bridge between divinity and humanity. Someone who can walk through both realms at once. Someone who can sit in silence and still hear heaven sing. Someone who doesn't need validation to know they're chosen. You carry calm authority now, not the kind that commands a room, but the kind that changes its atmosphere. Wherever you go, peace follows. That's why the angels rose, not just to honor your endurance, but to mark your embodiment. You've become the message. From this point forward, your journey shifts from survival to service. Heaven begins using your story as a map for others who are still wandering through the silence. You'll meet people who mirror your past pain, and you'll recognize it instantly, not to relive it, but to redeem it. You'll help them see that divine stillness is never wasted time, it's sacred timing. You'll teach them that heaven doesn't shout in storms, it whispers in calm. And through your calm, they'll begin to hear heaven again. But even in this new season of clarity and peace, you'll stay humble, because you'll never forget what it felt like to cry and hear nothing back. That memory keeps your heart soft. It keeps compassion alive in you. You'll carry it like a sacred scar, not as a wound, but as a reminder. It will keep you human, even as you operate in divine flow. Because the greatest servants of heaven are not those who boast of miracles, but those who remember mercy. You've been shown mercy in the silence. Now you'll become an instrument of it. And here's the beautiful paradox. The same heaven that once went silent for you will now speak through you. You'll begin to receive downloads, insights, and intuition with ease. Not because you're special, but because you're surrendered. You'll find that wisdom flows without effort when you live in peace. Ideas come in stillness, solutions appear in silence, answers rise in rest. You'll move through life like water, gentle, yet unstoppable. That's the rhythm of divine embodiment. When the angels look at you now, they don't see the pain you endured. They see the light you've become. They see the healed version of you walking through the same world with new awareness. They see the purpose that was once buried beneath confusion now glowing through every word, every gesture, every act of kindness. That's what heaven celebrates, not the noise of success, but the sound of peace returning to a heart that once broke in silence. You've crossed over. You're no longer surviving silence. You're guiding others through it. You've moved from being tested to being trusted, from asking for signs to becoming one, from praying for deliverance to walking as deliverance. The isolation that once felt like exile was really initiation. You've been initiated into divine mastery, the kind that doesn't seek applause but alignment. The kind that lives quietly, loves deeply, and moves intentionally. And maybe now you understand what the angels saw that day when heaven went silent. They saw a soul being refined into gold. They saw divine character forming through chaos. They saw someone chosen to carry peace into a restless world. That's why they stood, because they knew that once the silence ended, your voice would carry heaven's tone.
You are that voice now, calm, steady.
Anchored in faith. You don't need thunder to prove heaven is real. Your presence does it. You don't need signs to confirm you're chosen. Your peace confirms it. You don't need to be loud to be powerful. Your stillness carries authority. The same silence that once broke you has become your greatest strength. So now, as you stand at the end of this long, sacred journey, take a deep breath. Look back at everything you survived, the nights, the waiting, the losses, the unanswered prayers, and smile. Not because it was easy, but because it was holy. You didn't just make it through. You became something sacred in the process. Heaven went silent for a moment, and then every angel started praising your name, not because of what you gained, but because of who you became. You became the embodiment of peace after chaos, of faith after silence, of love after loss. You became the proof that divine timing never fails. You became the living echo of heaven's truth, that silence is not absence, it's transformation. And now, as your story continues, you'll carry that truth into every place you go, every soul you touch, every silence you enter, because you've learned that the end of one silence is the beginning of another, not one of pain, but one of peace. A silence filled with trust, grace, and divine knowing. The silence of completion, the silence of arrival, and in that stillness, heaven smiles, because the journey is complete. The chosen one has awakened.